Outstanding Monday, everybody. It's Leo Robles here. Welcome back to the weekly Power Up and Market Update. This is Leo Robles. I'm very excited to speak with you today. It is April 5th, 2021, and it is my birthday month. So I'm very excited today and this month a little bit more because it's my birthday. I celebrate all month, every single day. So you got to be extra nice to me. And, the topic that I created for you today, I'm going to get into it here shortly. But the intention of this conversation is to empower you to be inspired and resourceful to be the greatest benefit to everyone. Let's grow. Because I think that life is all about growth, right? We're either growing or we're dying. Those are the only two, I would say scenarios in our life. So my intention is that you're on a growth trajectory. And I want to tell you that growth is an option, right? Growth is not something that just happens. Growth is you're going to grow in maybe directions that you don't want to grow in, right? Which is, lateral, right? And you're going to grow, in your pant size, but that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about growing, emotionally, growing physically, growing spiritually, growing mentally. You really want to put yourself in a position where you're growing every single day. So the way you do that is by being intentional, right? That's why I start everything that I do with an intention. So the topic I created for you today, just because we just, had an Easter Sunday, and we had a great Easter weekend, and my intention is that your Easter was great. Live in the role or the soul. Live in a role or live in the soul, right? That's the conversation that I have for you today, because I think that, obviously in remembrance of, of Jesus, and, everybody's talking about he has risen. And I think that what Jesus was really pointing to, it was really talking to you directly. And he was saying, you know what? I want you to be an embodiment of who I am, right? And if we would look at what Christ represented, he represented unconditional love, and he represented acceptance. He represented just literally unconditional love, right? Even when he was, getting hit, and he was literally getting crucified, then he was still able to love the people that were doing this, because he knew that they didn't know what they were doing, right? He always said that. He said, forgive them, for they know not what they do. So my intention today is to kind of create a separation of what you can live in if you're identified with a role, or you could be identified with the soul, right? And in a role, you're going to be very structured, right? You might be a son or a daughter. You might be a husband, or you might be a wife. You might be an aunt. You might be an uncle. You might be a real estate agent, where most of you are that's going to be listening to this, right? You might be a government official. You might be born in a certain country, right? You're an age. But all of those are roles and labels, right? From the moment that we were born, we were giving these roles and we were giving these labels, and we're constantly living into these roles. But my belief system is that we're beyond all of these roles, right? Because if we were just a role, then that means that we wouldn't be able to change, right? Whatever cards we were dealt with since the moment that we were born, we were basically born into that role. Well, what if, for like most of us, like myself, I wasn't born into a wealthy family. So that means that what? Because I wasn't born into a wealthy family, I'm going to be now in a role of poverty, right? And then also that brings me back to, something that else that happened this weekend. It was Martin Luther King's not birthday, but the day that he was killed, right? Martin Luther King really stood for equality and to eradicate, poverty in the world. And he stepped outside of his role. Talk about stepping outside of his role. He was, he was a black man. And at that point in time, you didn't have the same quote unquote rights as everyone else. He literally stepped out of that role. He was living from the soul, right? Because the soul understands that you're infinite. The soul understands that you're unlimited. The soul understands that you could be anyone and anything at any time, right? The soul doesn't have a boundary, right? So when you are creating, when you are out there manifesting, when you're out there declaring to the world that you want something different for yourself, you're speaking from the soul. And the more that you live in your soul rather than your role, then the more your life can become what your heart really desires, because the impulse and the intentions and the energy that's coming and radicating from you, it's coming from your heart, right? You're getting all of these amazing ideas of what is possible. You know, what else is possible for your life? What sort of impact you can make. And that's the other thing, right? Once we get to a certain point where we understand that all our needs are met, then the next thing that we do as human beings, right? Because I asked a lot of people questions like, you know, what are you going to do when you have all the money? What are you going to do when you have all of the things that you want? And the most 99% of people will say, I'm going to go help. I'm going to go serve. I'm going to go give, right? So that's the natural expression of the soul. It's to give. It's to give, because at that soul level, we understand that you and I are not separate. We understand that there is no such thing as, you know, countries. There's no such thing as races. There's no such thing as division. We're all one being, one human organism, right? And that's how I think that, I mean, at least for me, I've lived my life more from the soul level, the more that I can live from the soul level, because when we're in a role, we're in the ego's dimension. And in the ego's dimension is very rigid, very structured, and it's only, you know, like I said, it's very boxy. It's very hard for people to really change when they've been in a role for a long time, right? Like if you were to meet somebody that was probably, you know, and maybe in government, and they've been doing this for 30, 40 years, they're conditioned in this role super tight. Like it's like they have a super tight box of like, this is who I am, this is how the world is, this is how things should be, and this is how you should be, right? They have very strong opinions on how the world is, because they're looking at the world from a tiny little box. So when you're living from a role, you're going to be living life from that little box, right? When you're living from the soul, it's infinite, right? There's no separation between you and I understand that you as a soul are infinite as well. So you basically have two choices in life. You can live from the role, right? The role that you've been giving, or the role that you've been born into, or the role that you believed you were. Or you can live from your soul, listen to your heart, and say, this is how I want to be. This is how I want to show up. This is the type of man I want to be. This is the type of woman I want to be. Whatever it is that you want to do, you want to be the embodiment of that. You got to declare it and allow your soul to speak rather than your role. Because again, I mean, I was very structured in a role all the way up until I started to work on myself. I started to really develop my mindset and really get out of my little box of what it meant to be a man. As a man, I wasn't supposed to, you know, feel emotions, because as a man, feeling emotions is not like a manly thing to do, right? I had that stupid belief system because I was in that little role, right? As a man, I wasn't supposed to wear, you know, just all these bright colors, I thought, because I'm like, you know what? That's not manly. Again, little box, right? So that also what was possible for me, you know what, as a Latino, you know, as a man, I'm like, you know what? I'm going to have to work hard for the rest of my life, because that's all I learned, right? And on my soul level, though, once I started to develop myself, I'm like, you know what? I think that there's an abundance of resources. There's an abundance of opportunities. Opportunities are everywhere. I could be who I want to be. I can express myself who I want to be. And I don't have to worry about being judged, because from the soul level, I understand that I am perfect just the way I am, right? The way that I speak, the way that I walk, the way that I talk, the way that I show up in the world is exactly how I am. And again, it's living from that soul level. So the soul's perspective, right? Because you can live from the role and you can think, oh my God, this is the way it is. But if you will find yourself being very judgmental and very like, you know what, like, you know, there's all of these people that are wrong, then you're living from a role. Because when you live from the soul's perspective, you understand that everybody has the right to be themselves as a soul. As a role, you think that there's enemies out there, right? So there's a clear distinction. As a role, there's wrong, there's right, there's separation, there's like bad people, there's good people, there's like the people that I like, the people that I don't like. From the soul's perspective, it's infinite, it's love, it's abundance. I accept everyone just the way they are, right? Everybody is perfect just the way they are. God is living through them, speaking through them, being through them from the soul level, right? So I just encourage you, we're stepping out here of this, Easter weekend, but really becoming an embodiment of, what Jesus really, really stood for. Because it's really easy to say, what, he has risen. Okay, cool. He has risen. What does that mean? Has he risen inside of you? Is he living in you? And are you an embodiment of what Jesus really stood for and what God really wants? Are you really an embodiment? And that means that you are going to most likely be more peaceful, more loving, more accepting, more abundant, right? From the soul's perspective, from the Christ consciousness. But don't just say the word, because when you say just the words and you're just saying like, yeah, you know what, he has risen. Okay, let me go back to my normal life. Then it doesn't mean anything. Like, don't waste your time on celebrating something that you have no connection to, because if you're going to embrace anything in your life, don't just talk about it, be about it, right? Literally, if you are interested in power and you are interested in changing your life, you have to become an embodiment of what you preach, right? Whatever it is that you want to see in the world, right? If you want to see more peace, more love, more abundance, then how are you an embodiment of that? How are you showing up like that in every single conversation and in every interaction? Especially for the situations where you're being tested, especially when people are not being the way that you want, when people are saying the things that you don't want them to say, when people are stepping out of bounds, right? In those situations, are you being an embodiment of what you preached? Are you being an embodiment of that Christ consciousness? Are you being an embodiment of love, acceptance, and abundance? Are you being an embodiment of that? Because if you're living from the role, the answer is most likely no. If you're living from the soul, then most likely yes, right? Work on yourself. Get in tune with yourself. Really identify your priorities. Get clear on your priorities. And guess what? Once you do this, you will have infinite power and you will be able to manifest anything your heart desires in the world, because you would understand that there's no limits and anything is possible, right? Not as a role, but as a soul, right? And then bring that forward to your daily life, bring that forward to your business, bring that forward to your relationships, bring that forward to your mind, and see how that blossoms into something beautiful in your life. Because that's what's going to happen, right? When you start to live more in the soul, that soul will start to bloom and radiate, this light and this energy. And when you step into a room, people are going to say, man, I like this person's energy. Man, that person's always so positive. Man, that person's always smiling. Man, that person's always optimistic. Why? Because you're living from the soul's perspective, right? And that's what I want to leave you here with you today. Thank you so much for listening, and create an outstanding rest of your day. Peace.